Thanks for joining us for the town hall, and we're going to start just across the border. Thousands of Western New Yorkers spent part of their summers in southern Ontario, with a lot of them owning cottages in Crystal Beach and these surrounding communities. Well, there is a new tax from the Canadian government that will not only impact those people, it could also harm the important binational relationship. Leaders on both sides of the border here are speaking out against this move from the federal government in Ottawa. Now, here's the backstory. The Trudeau government imposed this new 1% tax on, quote, vacant or underused housing owned by foreigners. The goal here was to deter overseas investors from buying up properties, especially in large metro areas like Toronto and Vancouver, and then leaving them vacant. While this could help with the serious lack of housing in those big cities, it's also having the seemingly unintended consequence here, including for Western New Yorkers who own those cottages in and around Fort Erie. Here's how the CBC covered the story this week, speaking with a woman from Buffalo who will be impacted.
The northeastern shore of Lake Erie, as calming as it may be, is now a flashpoint in a new cross-border dispute, pitting Americans who own cottages in Canada against the Canadian government, sparking threats of retaliation against hundreds of thousands of Canadians who own property in the U.S. While it includes specific exemptions to shield seasonal property owners, not all vacation communities are covered. American owners say the rules are confusing and unfair. The tax on this cottage, owned by one family for more than 80 years, will be around $10,000.
I feel like they want us to leave, and it's a sad feeling. And I know I'm not alone in feeling that.
So Congressman Brian Higgins from here in Buffalo is calling on the Biden administration to work with the Canadian government to fix this. Otherwise, he says he'll propose a retaliatory tax that would hit Canadians who own property in the U.S. But Higgins told me he doesn't think it'll get to that point. When you think back to the pandemic, so many Western New Yorkers couldn't even access their properties across the border. And this does just now seem to be another hit on top of the hit that they suffered during the pandemic.
It does. But, you know, the United States and Canada, we are each other's greatest trading partners. Our economies and our life quality is deeply integrated. I believe that the U.S., Mexico, Canada free trade agreement, which was signed a couple of years ago, prohibits discrimination based on national origin of the member countries. So, you know, this is diplomacy. We're going to have to work through it. But again, the explicit purpose for imposing the tax was a problem that was specific to Toronto and to Vancouver. That is not the case in Southern Ontario. That is not the case in the Niagara region. That is not the case in Thunder Bay, Bay Beach, Crystal Beach, and all those cottage communities that are part of the township of Fort Erie.
Jerry Zemski, who is a friend of this show, wrote about all of this for the Buffalo News earlier this week, talking with people directly impacted, as well as speaking with politicians in both countries. And Jerry joins us now live tonight. He is an enterprise reporter for the Buffalo News, longtime D.C. bureau chief, also a journalism professor. Jerry, it's great to have you back on. I know you talked with people here in Buffalo directly impacted by this, quite a few of them. Can you just share some of their stories and the incredible frustration that they must be feeling over this not proposed tax? I mean, it's in effect. They're going to have to start paying it pretty soon.
Oh, yeah, it's not a proposed tax, it's an imposed tax. And what seems to be troubling the people I talked with in Buffalo are a few things. Number one, there hasn't been any clear communication from the Canadian government to any homeowners about what they might owe, whether their properties will be taxed or will not. The rules, the property owners say, are just very confusing at this point in time. Then they also bring up the question of fairness, that many of these homes have been in families for 50 or 100 years. These people who live in Buffalo during the year are very ingrained into the Fort Erie community as well in the summertime. And I think a lot of them feel very, very offended that the Canadian government would treat them this way with this rather steep tax of 1% of the property value each year.
Congressman Higgins there said that a retaliatory tax is on the table. You think of all the Canadians who own property in Ellicottville, Chautauqua Lake, elsewhere in Western New York, plus I mean, think about Florida and all the people who own property there. Obviously, that would be a last option, but is that something that you could see getting building support in Washington, D.C. if the Canadian government doesn't change course?
I can see that moving through the congressional system in one way or another. Congressman Higgins is on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that draws up tax legislation. And I would not be surprised if he were able to get that proposal into some tax legislation at some point in time. Whether it would go all the way through the House, Republican-controlled House, and then the Democratic-controlled Senate is another matter. But I think the threat is real. And I think he's serious about the threat, too, because this has been going on for a while. I wrote my first story on this nearly 2 years ago, and there's really been very little response or action to change the rules on part of the Canadian government.
And Jerry, it's not just the 1% tax. There is also the ban that is in effect right now for foreigners purchasing properties in Canada. As you've covered this, is it something that the leaders in Ottawa just aren't aware of these sort of unintended consequences, as people are saying? I mean, everybody agrees this was intended to deal with serious housing problems in the big cities, but then you have these other effects as well.
Yeah, I think that what probably happened in Ottawa was not a great deal of thinking about vacation areas like Fort Erie. The law is written in a way that tries to exempt vacation homes, but it also includes a provision that any property that's in a metropolitan area of a certain size will be taxed. So, of course, Fort Erie is considered to be part of the Niagara Falls, St. Catharines metro area in Canada, so those properties would be taxed. Now, there are exemptions if homes are not winterized, for example, but still, a number of homes over there clearly are winterized, used all year round, or could be used all year round, or have heating, etc., and those would be subject to the tax.
Finally, Jerry, bigger picture, there are questions about the relationship between these two countries. As part of your article, the Buffalo News interviewed a councilman from Fort Erie. I want to play a part of that interview.
I hope good sense prevails and that we can get on the same page, look at how our two countries, the integration, family, economy, culture, and how we can kind of heal this division.
So, Jerry, I've only got about 30 seconds left, but would you agree with that based on your reporting that this relationship that's existed for so long has been damaged over time?
Well, the relationship has changed over time. I remember back in the 80s when I lived in Buffalo, going to Fort Erie didn't feel all that different from going anywhere else in the Buffalo area. You had to go through the border, of course, but it was not a really difficult thing. It got more difficult after 9/11. It got infinitely more difficult during the pandemic. And so now this just seems to be like the latest chapter in a bit of a separation between two areas, Western New York and Southern Ontario, that have long been very closely tied.
Jerry Zemski is an enterprise reporter for the Buffalo News in the D.C. area, where he is also a college lecturer. Jerry, always great to see you. I've followed your reporting on this story very closely. I encourage everybody to go read it because we can only touch on a little bit of it here. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you much, Michael.